The Marvels is the 33rd movie in the assembly line production we now know as Disney Marvel. It's a startling reminder that a brand is only as good as what you put out. In recent years, Disney and Marvel have relied on brand recognition over brand quality. Quality, or lack thereof, is the current flaw Marvel has to overcome. As it pertains to the Marvels, one thing it has going for it that has been fairly consistent within the brand is that the concept around the story they are attempting to tell isn't necessarily terrible, but rather it is the execution of that concept that ends up turning off audiences. The Marvels is a strong example of this problem. It's a very simple plot with sadly also very simple characters. Watching this feels like I'm only seeing 1/3 of a story, and with a runtime of 90-odd minutes, that's a pretty terrible result when it comes to pacing and overall story development. What's the plot? A Kree lady by the name of Dar-Benn has vowed revenge by way of stealing resources from planets that Captain Marvel considers home. Why is she stealing these resources? Well, as a result of a very convoluted moment of Captain Marvel destroying the Supreme Intelligence, the Kree fell into a civil war which resulted in depleting its oceans. The Kree homeworld sun has also gone dormant for some reason, and Dar-Benn blames it all on Captain Marvel. For the past 30 years, Dar-Benn has been massing troops and searching for some device that will allow her to achieve her goal. Enter Miss Marvel's bangle. Well, not really. You see, somehow Dar-Benn finds this bracelet. It's a really watered-down version of how the Red Skull finds the Tesseract. It doesn't have drama, intrigue, or cleverly disguised exposition. Sadly, it's just Dar-Benn on a moon digging up the bracelet. I'm pretty sure they say what these bracelets actually are in the movie. Let me check.
What you're describing is a quantum band.
Quantum band.
Quantum band.
The quantum bands. Quantum bands.
Ah yes, the quantum bands. These are the weapons used by Quasar in the Marvel Comics, but in this current derivative of the franchise, one will be in the hands of this story's villain, and the other is possessed by Kamala Khan as shown in her Miss Marvel streaming series. Once Dar-Benn finds the bracelet and uses it with her Kree hammer, she begins her plan by traveling to a Skrull colony under the guise of peace negotiations, only to betray the Skrulls and steal their atmosphere. Steal their atmosphere. Doesn't that plot point sound familiar? As if it was done before, in a film with a smaller budget and likable characters. A parody, I think. Nah, I must be imagining it. Why would the MCU need to lift a plot device from a 30-year-old movie, given all the issues Marvel Comics has printed across 6 decades? Aside from Dar-Benn's scheme, there is this other plot point that somehow connects, or rather links, Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, and Kamala Khan's powers. If they use their powers at the same time, they switch physical locations with each other. Why does this happen? No explanation. This is a contrived plot device used to bring these 3 characters together for the sake of the story as opposed to a compelling reason. The first 40 minutes of the movie is chaos exploring this gimmick between these 3, along with them swapping, fighting, and somehow all ending up on the Skrull colony as Dar-Benn steals their atmosphere. What puzzles me is that if Dar-Benn has one of the bracelets or quantum bands, and she's able to use powers with it as well, why isn't she switching with Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, or Kamala Khan? The movie never addresses that. Well, regardless, on the Skrull colony, these Marvels organize an emergency evacuation where the few Skrulls they are able to save get transported to New Asgard by way of a cameo from Valkyrie, who is apparently a friend of Carol's. When did this relationship happen? Now that the Skrull story beat has concluded, the movie decides to spend time with these 3 girls. I'd call them women, but they don't act like adults despite appearances. They share memories, figure out how their powers interlink, and somehow deduce that Dar-Benn is going after a planet I think called Aladdin to steal their water. Somehow these Marvels arrive at the planet before Dar-Benn to warn them and also get some new fighting costumes. There's a brief musical number as the primary form of communication in this world is via song. Because women like singing? I don't know. Once that is out of the way, Dar-Benn and her forces attack. This normal Kree lady with a hammer and bracelet manages to hold her own against Captain Marvel, who was able to give the Mad Titan Thanos a run for his money. How did Dar-Benn become so powerful? Is it all the bracelet, or is there something more? What are the rules here? We've seen Captain Marvel take out a spaceship the size of Rhode Island, yet this average Kree soldier can go toe-to-toe with the Infinity Stone-infused Captain Marvel. Whatever. An hour has already passed and this movie is coming to a close. This would be the mid-act turning point normally, as the Marvels fail to save Aladdin's oceans and Carol reveals that the only reason she didn't return to Earth to see Monica is because she was trying to fix a problem she caused and didn't want to return to Monica as a failure. Because, of course, Monica would know what is occurring on planets and other solar systems throughout the galaxy in the 1990s and early 2000s. Thankfully, there is no time for them to dwell on this story beat because Monica has figured out that Dar-Ben is going to steal Earth's sun to replace the dying one of the Kree homeworld. So the three travel back to Earth to stop her. There's another subplot involving Nick Fury, Kamala's family, and the space station Saber, but it's messy, boring, and mostly has to do with the Flerken laying eggs. There's something about the station being compromised and they have to evacuate but don't have enough operational life pods to get everyone to safety, so the movie wastes time by having the Marvels help use the baby Flerkens to swallow the crew of the space station so they can be safely transported to Earth via the limited working escape pods. Once that distraction is complete, the Marvels face off against Dar-Ben in a 3-on-1 battle. Dar-Ben's forces are nowhere to be found out of story convenience. Dar-Ben manages to get Kamala's bracelet, uses them to open a rift to steal Earth's sun, but is consumed by the power and dies in a very anticlimactic fashion. Then we see Kamala's powers aren't connected to the bracelet at all, as she uses her Green Lantern / Mr. Fantastic energy constructs to grab Captain Marvel and the two bracelets. So she doesn't need the bracelets to give her powers. So what's the point of the bracelet then? Who knows? But the movie isn't over yet. The rift that Dar-Ben made was not just to another planet, but also another universe. Monica Rambeau takes a wild guess and suggests that Carol can fly into the Kree sun and reactivate it, but before she can do that, she needs to charge up Monica with power so she can close the space-time rift that is slowly growing and it is implied will compromise the solar system. That's how Monica exits this film, repairing a space rift and being trapped in another universe. Captain Marvel returns to the Kree homeworld, recharges their sun, and then returns to Monica's home in Louisiana to keep an eye on her possessions until Monica comes back. As for what happened to the oceans of Aladdin or the Skrull colony that lost its atmosphere, your guess is as good as mine. It is never addressed. Finally, the movie concludes with Kamala Khan emulating Nick Fury from the end of Iron Man to proposition Kate Bishop into joining a team. Then, after a few minutes of credits, we catch up with Monica Rambeau, who is reunited with an alternate universe version of her mother, who isn't Captain Marvel, but rather a revamped variation of Binary, a more recently added character at Marvel Comics in a terribly colored costume talking with Kelsey Grammer's Beast. And that's the Marvels. The movie isn't really terrible. I mean, I've seen a lot of far more terrible films than The Marvels, and rating it against other terrible films will only make The Marvels seem better by comparison, and that's not how audiences should measure a film, especially one that is an entry in an overall franchise. It's always better to measure against the best because at least you're aiming for something worth aiming for, whether you're making it or whether you're watching it. In that regard, The Marvels is pretty low on the list when it comes to character development and enjoyment. It's a very basic movie. It doesn't stimulate any of the senses or pose any questions to engage the audience. It's just there. It has no theme. The character conflicts are disposable and superficial without any risk or impact on what is happening to them. They essentially end up in the same position character-wise that they were at the beginning of the film, so they don't have character arcs, but it's also not really offensive in comparison to the virtue speech from Falcon and the Winter Soldier or most of the former Arrowverse shows from the CW. You could almost call that progression, but a lack of a worse idea among terrible execution of better ideas does not make a movie good. It's just a bunch of women acting girly instead of acting like women within the context of a sci-fi adventure. Kamala's family has fine moments. Kamala herself exudes a lot of energy, relishing being part of this film franchise. You don't hate to watch her, but you're not impressed with the lines her character is given either. This interpretation of Carol Danvers is actually far more enjoyable to watch than what we've seen in previous iterations. In fact, there's a lot less snarkiness in the attitudes of these characters than one would normally expect having seen the most recent Marvel films. What is disappointing is that there really isn't any character conflict between the three leads. Monica is upset Carol never came back, but it's not really a hang-up, and Kamala fangirling around Captain Marvel is not treated like an annoyance or like irresponsible behavior when it comes to Carol. Instead, she apologizes for her tone, and the three decide to work together in the first act of the film. There's no real lessons or mentorship, no real responsibilities to address, or lack of maturity to overcome. Instead, we see them play with jump rope. Coming away from the Marvels, I can identify seeds to a potentially good story that could have come from this premise had the movie actually put in the effort to focus on the characters more so than the set pieces. Why the studio chose to keep the antics occurring on the Saber Station instead of utilizing that time to show the Marvels actually working together and developing their characters through real high-stakes conflict instead of having them share memories in some type of space slumber party setting is beyond me. The positives of this movie is that the villain's goals and motivations are good. Sadly, we're not really shown why the villain is a threat. We're merely told, and the examples that they attempt to show this villain as formidable just don't measure up. She doesn't display any traits that would make me believe she could amass a huge following and organize this scheme to restore her homeworld. We don't get a sense of ruthlessness from her, nor do we get a sense of meticulous planning or obsession or desperation. Nothing to round out this character to get people engaged. After all, a story is only as good as its villains, and while they have a good goal and motivation, the movie kind of forgets the rest of the attributes that make a villain a villain. As for the faults, I've pointed out a few of them thus far, but I think the film's biggest fault is the easy resolutions to problems presented along with the utter abandonment of other problems, most notably the 2 planets that had their atmosphere and oceans stolen. The best rule to meet in storytelling is to never make anything easy for your protagonists, and this movie breaks that rule many times. When that rule is broken, you betray your audience who has invested time and money to be surprised and entertained. They want to see imagination, cleverness, wit, guile, all the things that bring tension, catharsis, and most importantly, satisfaction. I describe the Marvels as the equivalent to Muzak in an elevator. It is just there. You can choose to notice it if you want to, but it's not required.